The hardest thing in the world to understand is the income tax. Albert Einstein.
Can you tax the rich enough to balance the government budget? That is the question I'm going to answer. Like, a lot of people think inequality is a problem, and you can solve the government's fiscal problems simply just by taxing the rich more. I wanted to challenge this and just kind of add up the numbers and see how much money would need to be taxed in terms of a wealth tax to be able to balance the budget and pay off the national debt. First, let's use the United States as my example, because the United States has the most billionaires, so it is the most likely country to be able to pull this off. And it has also the most amount of centibillionaires and the most amount of centimillionaires, and just in general, the most amount of people with high net worth, say over 20 million, which is, according to this channel, what the definition of truly rich is. So with that, let's get into the numbers. First, the number of billionaires in the United States, according to inequality.org, is $5.3 trillion of combined wealth. So that, by comparison, the national debt in the United States is $33 trillion, and the deficit this year is $1.9 trillion, which is a record high. So if you just used the deficit, the national debt is going to cover about 2 years and 9 months worth of the national deficit. If you took every dollar away from every billionaire in the United States. There could be hidden money in other assets that just are privately held. So let's just round it up to 6 trillion. That's 3 years of the national debt. Now, what about that? Billionaires aren't the only rich people out there. What about centimillionaires, people's net worth 100 million to 999 million? There are about 8,400 of them in the US as of 2021, so it's slightly higher now. And their total wealth, let's just assume that the average person in this category has a $250 million net worth. It's probably lower, but let's just use this because of power law dynamics with these kind of things. But to use that number, estimate of 2.1 trillion. But we're going to round it up due to inflation and economic growth. So it's probably closer now to 2.5 trillion. So that puts us at a combined $8.5 trillion in worth. So if you took away all the money from the billionaires and the centimillionaires, that will pay for about a fourth of the national debt. And it will pay for about 4.5 years or so of the national deficit, which is kind of crazy to think how exponential the US fiscal crisis really is right now. I'm just putting it into numbers. Now we factor all the billionaires and all 9,850 centimillionaires in the United States. And next, what we have to do is we need to discuss the $20 to $100 million range, because according to the definition of this own channel, you're truly rich if you're at least 20 million in net worth. So that adds another tens of thousands of people to this equation. And if you add up all of their net worth, the net worth of the centimillionaires and the net worth of the billionaires, the total now you're getting is closer to 12 to 13 trillion dollars, according to aggregators who track this stuff, such as Henley and Associates. And I'll have citations in the video for this for people who want numbers on all of it. And these are all approximations because the economy has grown and these studies are static. They don't really factor in every fluctuation in the market necessarily. So I am just using kind of round ballpark figures. And the upside estimates really for all of this is of a total of everybody, if you include billionaires, centimillionaires, and the 20 million plus. The total is, I'd say, 6 trillion for the billionaires, 2.5 trillion for the centimillionaires, and then another 12 to 14 trillion for the 20 million plus people. So if you add all these together, it's probably about $20 trillion, which covers at current levels a little less than 2/3 of the national debt and 10 years of the deficit. The problem really that I kind of forgot to mention for all this is if you just take everybody's money all at once, they no longer have any capital to reinvest in their businesses, and you don't really have any cumulative wealth to tax because you just robbed everybody over $20 million of net worth of all their money. So there really isn't any left. So this is only a one-time thing, which is why if you want to make it work, you would need it to be able to pay off effectively the entire debt. And it does a little bit more than half. So it is a sizable chunk, but then you basically killed your productive capacity, and all of your entrepreneurial talent is basically never going to want to try to take any risk because they know that this type of reappropriation can happen again. So you can't just do a blanket sweep. There's clearly, it's not enough. And it's the problem. Let's just say if they try to do this like in a wealth tax where you tax a small amount of that every year, and hopefully that accumulates and compounds over time so that you still have your tax base left. Let's just say on that 20 trillion, you had a 5% wealth tax every year. That would give you 1 trillion a year. That would cover at the current pace half of the deficit. So in theory, you can cover half the deficit and make it a much more manageable level, and maybe cut the defense spending by a little bit and do a few other fiscal arrangements, and you could theoretically balance the budget with a 5% annual wealth tax. If you did a 10% annual wealth tax, then you solved the problem theoretically. However, in practice, there's problems with this too. One, if you get as high as 10% for your wealth management side of things, then you're going to have the fundamental issue that you're not going to be able to compound returns fast enough to make up for the losses in the wealth tax. And so as a result, those fortunes will eventually be eroded within a decade. So you're going to kill your tax base because that rate is too high. Let's just say you do 5%. And let's just say for conservatively, that's the same amount of return on investment that these billionaires can get on average every year on their capital. So they're effectively, you're taking away their entire ROI. Like they basically get to keep their base, but any returns on investment essentially are going to the government. Then that creates its own set of problems. First of all, why would these people stay in the country? They would move and renounce their citizenships. And yeah, they might have to pay an exit tax, which is on the books in the United States. You would have to do that. And the exit tax could theoretically fix this. But if you have that sort of wealth and power, they will try to find ways to avoid that too. There still is the problem of capital flight, and all this money is going to move out, and therefore you're not going to have the recurring revenue you hope for from such a policy. And I don't really think at any level this is going to work because, one, there's the slippery slope problem. And even if it's a small one, just 1% for those above 100 million, like Harris is proposing, people are going to see that, oh, they're going to eventually raise it and use it to hit me too. And it's going to cause a panic. And that panic is going to cause a lot of people to sell their assets and leave. And also, a lot of, as I mentioned before in my video about the great wealth transfer, there's a large chunk of this wealth, like 10% of it is concentrated in family businesses, and another 20 to 30% is in real estate, which are all illiquid. What do you expect people to do if their wealth is almost all in those? Are they going to have to sell a fraction of their family business every year to pay the wealth tax? I mean, again, I got into more of these issues in a video that I did back in June, back when Biden was still a candidate, about why this unrealized capital gains tax policy is an unmitigated disaster. So I'm not going to repeat that whole thing here. But in general, the capital flight's going to be a severe issue, and the devaluation of assets as a result of increased selling pressure to cover these taxes and lower valuations, because the after wealth tax returns on everything is going to be lower. So people are going to be willing to pay less for investments. So let's just say instead of the 5%, it's a 1% wealth tax like Harris proposed, except it only applies down to people of 20 million or more. That would be about 200 billion in revenues, which would cover about 10% of the deficit, which is not going to really be enough to really fix the fiscal situation. The deficit needs to go down by at least 50%, if not more, for a longer term sustainable path. And you're risking basically torching the credibility of the capital markets and the credibility of the US as a safe place to store capital. So that's why I don't really think that could work. And it needs to be big enough that you can pay off this stuff relatively quickly and without doing too much damage to the country's credibility. So in theory, the answer is, can you tax your way out of the debt problem? The answer is surprisingly yes. The longer term consequence of the economy will probably be much worse if you did it. But in theory, a wealth tax of about 10% per year or even 5% a year would be enough really to fix a lot of the fiscal situation with a few minor changes elsewhere. However, that is not going in practice. That will not work due to the unintended consequences and how people would react to such a policy. If people just didn't change anything they were doing now and just blindly went along with this, yeah, that would work great. And that's how a lot of these policies sound good on paper, because they really ignore the factors of human action that will cause unintended consequences and people to react in ways that are adverse to making the policy work. However, even with basically robbing everybody who's wealthy in this country blind, it's still not enough to pay off the debt completely if you did it in one fell swoop, and barely enough really to fix the deficit if you did it in a more gradual swoop. So what is the answer? How do you fix the fiscal situation in the United States? Well, that's a much longer conversation and a separate one from this video. If you would want me to make a proposed budget of how to balance the government's finances, please leave a like or a comment. And if I get enough requests, perhaps I'll make a video of that. Thank you guys all for watching. Keep it up with the high quality Discord on this show. And also, if you want to support us, feel free to download a copy of the reading list book and or join our Patreon or members. Thanks for watching.